Good morning and welcome to the IDPH Prevention Iowa Grants Overview webinar. My name is Katie B. and I'm a prevention consultant within the Bureau of Substance Abuse within the Division of Behavioral Health at the Iowa Department of Public Health. Today is July 28th, 2020. Today's webinar is slated to take place from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. So the purpose of today's webinar is to provide a general overview of the iowagrants.gov system and answer any follow-up questions that you may have. As we lead into the overview, this next slide will be talking about the reminder of WebEx etiquette. The bulk of today's webinar is going to be not only reviewing Iowa Grants, but also the purpose of the system and each of the components listed within iowagrants.gov. And at the end of today's webinar, we will be holding a questions and answers forum. So the review of WebEx. So again, this meeting will be recorded. We ask that you please mute your microphone as well as turn off your webcam during today's webinar, just to minimize any potential distractions that may arise. We do encourage that you include any questions that you may have within the chat feature that's listed on the top of your page on that ribbon. All questions will be addressed at the end of today's training. So at the conclusion of the actual webinar, I will stop recording, and then following that moment is when I will address any questions that are listed within the chat feature, as well as participants are able to unmute their line at that time to ask any questions they may have. So kind of talking about the purpose and the preface of today's webinar, the expectation that all IDPH prevention funded contractors use the iowagrants.gov system throughout the life of their project period specific to their funding opportunity. So with the project period, please remember that the contract period or contract year is based on the fiscal year. So that could be, for example, July 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. And the project period is the entire duration of the grant. So that could be a 4, 5, or 6-year project period. In addition, contractors must follow the guidelines within the IDPH iowagrants.gov user guides and any additional resources that are provided to you following the webinar that are approved by the department. Now, over the next slide, we will be doing a high-level overview of what those user guides are and how they can set you up for success when it comes to learning and navigating iowagrants.gov. In addition, it's important to know that the iowagrants.gov system, it serves as the contractor grant site. So this is the vessel that we use when there's any type of communication or any contract-related guidance or documents that it's kind of housed in one location. So this is really an important tool that we use to assure that all of those resources, all those communications are in one location. So here are the available guides that are currently made available and will be sent to you following today's webinar. So you'll see there are several. So what we have the Iowa Grants registration directions. So anytime a contractor is wanting to register a new user in iowagrants.gov, this tutorial will teach you how to do that. One of the great things about these guides is it's actually a screenshot of the pages of iowagrants.gov, which is a step-by-step instruction on what buttons you would click, on what to expect. So it should be a pretty streamlined process and guide for you all to use if you have questions on, for example, how to register somebody within the system. So we do encourage all contractors to familiarize themselves with these guides because we really wanted to take the guesswork out for individuals. So again, these will be made available to you here shortly. In addition to the registration directions, we also have guides on how to complete a negotiated form for external users. External users are also referred to as our contractors. So this would be, for example, if the budget or the work plan component was negotiated to your agency, how you would actually find that negotiated form, make those revisions, and then resubmit those components to the department staff. In addition, there is a guide on correspondence, so how to develop a correspondence within iowagrants.gov. We really encourage, and we'll talk about this later in today's webinar, that all contractors use the correspondence component when they have specific contract-related questions that are concrete and specific to the grant. Now, with that said, you are more than welcome to send me an email. And if there's ever an email that I receive on behalf of a contractor that would need to be put into correspondence, myself as well as my colleagues will simply just respond and asking for the contractor to put the request in correspondence. So know that any contract related content really should go through that correspondence component, and the guide will teach you how to do that. In addition, we have a site visit component guide. We do have one for internal IDPH staff as well as external users for the contractors. So as we've talked about in past webinars, each IDPH prevention contractor will go through an annual site visit process, and that may be on site or it may be virtual. But regardless of how the site visit is actually conducted, there is a site visit component listed within iowagrants.gov that will be utilized to document that site visit process from beginning to end. We also have a standard budget claim form guide. And so when contractors are submitting claims for actual expenses incurred, there is a document showing how to actually submit those claims. And then lastly, the guide that we have listed here, which many of you are probably familiar with, is this is the IDPH application instructions. So for any contractor who is applying for a funding opportunity, whether it's competitive through a request for proposal or it's ongoing through a request for application or a request for bid, this is the application to actually complete that process. Desk. So you would contact Iowa Grants Help Desk for any non-contract questions. So this really is, you would reach out to the help desk for basically usability of the system. Any contract-related questions, again, budgets, personnel, work plans, etc., that would go to your project coordinator via correspondence. But if you have questions about accessing a component, not being able to log into the system, not being able to submit a form, situations similar to those, that's when it's appropriate to contact the Iowa Grants Help Desk. We do have Iowa Department of Public Health staff who are responsible for overseeing the help desk for all contracted agencies within the department. So we ask that when you send an email to them, to just be aware that they are working through many funding opportunities and get multiple requests on a daily basis. However, they are very responsive. So just know that we do have staff who are responsible for overseeing and managing that help desk and responding in a timely manner. So that last kind of section on this page is the email address that you would utilize to contact the Iowa Grants Help Desk, excuse me. And that's iowagrants.helpdesk@idph.iowa.gov. So if you would ever reach out to a project coordinator specific to the usability or the interface of Iowa Grants, and it's something that we cannot address, we will simply refer you to the Iowa Grants Help Desk. So this is what you will see when you first log on to iowagrants.gov. So this is kind of the initial landing page. So what's important to note for those of you on the call that maybe have never seen this screen before, all IDPH funded contractors, they have their own specific grant site. So during the application process and kind of the initial startup process of becoming an awarded contractor within IDPH, a system is set up, and those contracted agencies identify the agency staff who should have access to iowagrants.gov. So that is the responsibility, and the onus is on the agency to identify who should have access to this site. So if you have questions about that, I would just ask you to converse with your agency leadership to identify whether you should or should not have access to iowagrants.gov. And the important part about that is once an individual has access to iowagrants.gov, it's the entire grant site. So it's personnel, it's salary fringe, it's resumes. It's really everything that a contractor is responsible for uploading into the system for the specific contract. So when iowagrants.gov page, what you'll want to focus on is that lower right corner under the electronic grant management system. You'll see returning users sign in here, and that's what you will click on. When you click on that returning users sign in here, what you'll be navigated to is the page where you'll put your username and password in order to access your grant site. So once you click on that returning users sign in here and you enter your username and password, what you will find is you'll find a landing page, and within that landing page, you will select My Grants. And that will be listed in blue. And when you click on My Grants, all of the awarded funding opportunities that your agency has through the Iowa Department of Public Health will be available for view. So what you do is then you just simply select and click on the appropriate funding opportunity to access the appropriate grant site. So once you click on My Grants and you select the appropriate funding opportunity, you'll find this Iowa Grants landing page. Now, this is, you'll see under that budget tab, kind of 3/4 of the way down. I just pulled a screenshot from one of our historic funding opportunities, but for all intents and purposes, the components listed here will mirror what is available to you as well. So during the remaining portion of today's webinar, we're going to be walking through, again, a high-level overview of the content that's going to be put or what's included within each of these components and how these are utilized moving forward. And again, to actually have the usability with the screenshots, that's where you'll go and you'll reference those user guides, which will be made available to you here shortly. So when you click on the general information component, this is the content that you are going to be so that will say, for example, meaning that it's current grant site. It might say archived, so maybe it's a grant site from a different fiscal year that's archived, but it'll tell the status of that specific grant or project. It'll have your grantee organization name, as well as the grantee contact that is listed within your contract. So each IDPH funded prevention agency has to identify a grantee contact, who is basically the point person, if you will, for iowagrants.gov. So that is the person that we often reach out to if there's a question for the grant through Iowa Grants. We'll make sure we're contacting that person who's, again, listed in the contract, as well as within this component of Iowa Grants. We also within this page, you'll see the program officer, which typically is the fiscal manager, and that is currently Sherry Frizzell. So you'll see her name listed, as well as any additional internal contacts at IDPH. So that could be, it's more often than not your project coordinator or director. In addition, you'll see your program area. You'll see your contract number, the award year, and the project dates. What I do want to pay close attention to is within iowagrants.gov, there's a back button, but there's also a return to components button. And it is best practice to click on the return to components tab to be directed back to that initial landing page, which we showed you on the previous slide. So here is the content or the information that is collected on the claims page. So what you'll see is there'll be an ID number on the claims page, and typically that starts off with that 588 code, and then it'll be numbered numerically by the number of claims that have been submitted. So there'll be an ID number. There'll be the type of claim that was submitted. There'll be the status, meaning if it's being edited, is it being approved, has it been submitted? There'll be a status of the claim. There'll be the date the claim was submitted by the contracted agency. the date that the claim was paid, the date from and to. So claims are submitted on a monthly basis, so that you'll have, as the project period and the contract year goes on, you'll start getting a list, if you will, and each month it'll be listed from the date from and to. And then finally, it'll be that claim amount. So based on actual expenses incurred on a monthly basis, that last tab on the page will actually show the amount that your agency claimed to the department for expenses. We also have a progress reports component. So at the beginning of each contract year, the department will assign the progress reports for that contract year. So progress reports are due on a quarterly basis in accordance with the dates listed in your contract. So progress reports, the component, it includes the following content. So again, it has the ID, which begins with the project number. There'll be a type of progress report, so it may say unspecified or quarterly or final. There are different types of reports depending on what is requested within the funding opportunity, but more often than not, you'll see either quarterly or you'll see final, or both. There'll be the title, and that is a title that your project coordinator will determine. It may simply just say quarter one progress report. Again, it'll say the date from and to. So for example, for the quarter one progress report, in that date from and to, it'll say July 1, 2020. Let me do my math here. July, September, or July, June, July, August, September, excuse me. September 30th, 2020. There'll also be the due date for when those reports are due. And then it'll have the submitted date of when the contractor actually submitted that report. There'll actually be an arrived tab on this component as well. So it will state whether the report was submitted on time or if it was late. And if it is late, it'll note it was late, regardless of the reason of why a progress report was submitted late. It'll be noted as such within this component. And then lastly, there'll be a status report or a section, and that'll basically indicate if the report has been submitted by the agency, if it's currently been sent back for edits. So what you'll see editing within that component, if the department has reviewed the report and renegotiated it for revision, it'll say editing, or it'll say approved if the progress report has been reviewed and approved. So the next component we're going to talk about is the site visit component within Iowa Grants. So this is the component that is used to communicate with the department during those annual on-site or virtual site visits. So once site visits begin to get scheduled, the department will initiate communication via the grant site. So it'll be via the site visit component of Iowa Grants. When this initial communication takes place, what will happen is it'll be noted what type of review it is. You'll also receive a notification letter, which will be uploaded to the site visit component by the department staff, as well as any IDPH comments. And those comments may be that an agency has to upload some documentation that needs to be reviewed prior to the site visit, and instructions will be included within that, or just maybe an acknowledgement statement that the contractor needs to acknowledge that the communication has been received, etc. The contractor will need to complete and review that acknowledgement section by simply noting yes. And once you get into the site visit component, you can kind of explore, if you will, each of the sections in more depth to become familiar with the system. But you do have to acknowledge that you received the notification letter, that the date and the time works for you and your team, etc. The contractor will also upload information under the requested documents section. So there is a component within the site visit component where agencies will upload supporting documentation. So this is often where the department will request for the financial statements. So we had talked about there might be a random for example, 2-month audit of review. So maybe there'll be 2 months out of the contract year where the department will be reviewing the supporting documentation for claims. So what we would request is that the agency's policies and procedures are uploaded in this section, the actual claim that was submitted to the department, and any supporting documentation that the agency collected in order to submit those claims. So those are just some examples of the requested documentation that would be uploaded within that site visit component. Site visits continued. The department will complete the results section by uploading a site visit findings letter. So basically, when the department initiates the communication that a site visit is going to take place, the contractor acknowledges that the site visit date and time will work. The contractor then uploads all the necessary documentation requested by the department. At that time, after the department has reviewed all of that information, the actual site visit will take place. Once the site visit is concluded, then the department will go back and they'll develop a site visit findings letter for each contracted agency. Once that site visit letter is completed, it'll be uploaded into the site visit component for your agency to review. Once your agency's reviewed that site visit findings letter, you will provide a response indicating that you've reviewed and acknowledged the findings from the annual site visit. If there are any suggested revisions needed or anything that may have been missed, contractors absolutely have the ability to notify the department if there needs to be any changes to those site visit findings letter as appropriate. And then after that, once the acknowledgement is received, the department will upload a site visit closure letter, again, which will be uploaded within the site visit component. So the next component we're going to talk about that's listed within Iowa Grants is correspondence. This really, again, is that primary communication tool that your agency will use through Iowa Grants. So this is all focused on contract communication. So contractors shall use the correspondence of iowagrants.gov to communicate with the department. There is an inter-system grantee correspondence, that's the title of the page, and that really is the direct communication to the project coordinator. And as I had mentioned earlier, anything related to work plans, to budgets, to personnel, to claims, etc., any of those contract-specific questions or communications need to go through a correspondence. It's really important that a clear subject is identified. So you'll have a subject line when you start developing a correspondence. You'll have to identify who the message is going to, but you'll also have to include a subject. And it's really important that it's very clear of what that subject is. You'll identify within your message the actual department staff member by their name in the message, and please be sure that you provide your first and last name within that message, because if you do not include your first and last name, it only comes to us at the department as your grant number. So we will not know who is providing or who is asking those questions. So please be sure to include your first and last name anytime you send a message to department staff, so we know who is asking those questions. And then we will respond in a timely manner back to the contractor via that correspondence component. So this is really, again, that direct communication with your project coordinator for any contract specific questions. We do I would say about a year ago, we had a member of our prevention team who did about a 9-minute tutorial specific to correspondence and how to add someone to your grant site. And I will plan on sending you that recording as well, because that recording will walk you through the screenshots and kind of be a live action, if you will, on how to actually do the communication to your project coordinator. So know that that resource will be shared with you as well. In addition, you should be aware that there is also a non-system communication log. Now that is specific to IDPH staff members, but as I had mentioned earlier, it's more than okay if you send a direct email to your project coordinator. But in the event, again, that the message should be put into correspondence, your project coordinator may simply just upload that email communication within your grant site, depending on the nature of the message. So just know that there is that tracking mechanism in place as well, so that when we're thinking about the contractor grant site, all communication is kind of put into this one location. So the next component we're going to talk about is the cover sheet and general information page. So if you would click on this tab in Iowa Grants, what you would find is the authorized official, which is often your CEO, your director of your agency. You'll see your fiscal officer or agent that's listed within your agency, who is going to overseeing all fiscal components of your funding opportunity. You'll also see all of the participating counties. So based on the application that was submitted and how the services and the areas that your agency was awarded to provide services in, those counties are also listed within this component of Iowa Grants. In addition, you'll also see the congressional district, the Iowa Senate district, and the Iowa House districts will also be listed on this page. So now we're going to talk about the key personnel component. So it's very important that the individuals listed within the key personnel component also match the names and positions listed within the application, as well as the salary and fringe of the budget component. So on the key personnel page, what you'll see and what you'll have to complete is it'll be the title and the position description. And again, those titles and positions must align with the funding opportunity. So for example, for Improving Tomorrow, it's that there's 3 staff identified. It's the mentoring coordinator, the supervisor, and the fiscal contact. So those titles and positions should align in key personnel with the positions and titles listed in your RFP, your RFA, your RFB, etc. In addition, you would be including the individual's first name, their last name, their email address, a brief description of the roles and responsibilities, their experience and education, and then the last 2 tabs are credentials and license number, and then also a feature to upload that individual's resume. Moving into the project work plan component. So this component is where you will capture and clearly describe department approved work and services to take place over the contract year. With this component, the applicant's proposed service area is listed at the top of the page. And then often what you'll see are goals, SMART objectives, and activities. So based on the application that was submitted to the department for the funding opportunity, all of that information will be moved over to the project work plan based on the application submitted. And then what the department does is works with your agency directly if there are revisions needed to any of those sections. It is important that contractors adhere to the guidance provided within the funding opportunity for the request for a proposal to ensure the work plan is completed correctly. There are variations amongst funding opportunities, so you're going to want to make sure as a contractor that the information located within the project work plan component aligns with that RFP. So we're also going to move into the subcontract plan component. So within this component, contractors include the following details. They include whether or not a subcontract has been identified, which is simply a yes or a no. The scope of work to be performed through a subcontract, and this needs to be clear. We need to clearly know, who is going to be subcontracted with and the work and services that they are going to be providing to support and enhance that funding opportunity. You also need to include the anticipated dollar amount for each subcontract, the name of the subcontractor, their street address, the city, state, zip code, their qualifications, and then the service area the subcontractor will serve. So all of these components are listed on that specific page and need to be completed. So it is best if you contact your project coordinator if a subcontract will be utilized to discuss additional details. And those additional details are the process that contractors must adhere to if they're proceeding with a subcontract. Again, making sure that the contracted agency is utilizing the IDPH general conditions, section 5, et cetera. So just please be sure to contact your project coordinator to make sure that as a contractor, you're following the guidelines set in place if the subcontract is warranted. Now we're going to be talking about the budget category or the budget component. So what you'll see when you click on the budget component is the very top of the page, you'll see budget category. And this is more of a broad brush stroke. So this includes the grant funds total for the project. And this is basically a table that will outline salary fringe, other, the indirect administrative rate, and it basically is just a crosswalk to these broad categories and then the grant fund totals that you've determined as an agency that are needed. Then you'll go into the budget justification, and this really is the foundation of how those monies are going to be spent. So contractors will complete the direct line item budget to describe items to be budgeted and justify the budgets. So this really is where those details are needed. So again, for name, their position, their FTE amount, their total salary and fringe within those detailed components, so that total on the far right corner align details, direct line items for other, so supplies or trainings or curriculum, whatever that might be. The math is there, the details are there to justify that it's that the department knows how those monies are going to be spent to support the activities listed within the work plan. So those details are needed so that if we see example mileage, we know how many miles are anticipated for that contract year based on like a monthly average. So you might say, 500 miles times 12 months times 0.39 cents per mile. And then based on the amount in that details component, we can clearly look over to the grant funds total to see that those funds are justified. And then lastly, you'll see the indirect or administrative costs. Again, those are capped at 15% unless the contractor provides a federally approved indirect rate. So that is an overview of the budget component. Next, we're going to talk about the contracts document component of Iowa grants. So this really is where the department will upload any contract related documents for the contractor. So items that may be included within this component but are not limited to are your fully executed contract. So the signed contract by your agency director or CEO, as well as the department division director. So that fully executed contract will be located in contract documents. Any amendments that may occur over the life of the project period specific to those contracts would be uploaded to this component, as well as an annual notification of performance measures. So at the end of each contract year, the project coordinator will develop basically a sheet or a document that indicates which contracted agencies did or did not meet the performance measure. And then that document is uploaded into your contract documents component. So again, not an exhaustive list, but kind of an idea of where those really important documents are housed within Iowa grants. And oftentimes a message is sent via correspondence from your project coordinator to your grantee contact, notifying your agency if a document has been placed within the contract documents component. There's also an opportunity component that's listed within Iowa grants, and it really highlights the following. It has a description of the funding opportunity, the project and contract period. It talks about the eligible applicants, and most of this is pulled directly from the request for proposal or the request for application. There's the service delivery area, the funding that's available through that specific award, the schedule of important dates. So this is, prior to the award being the notice of a notice of intent to award of being published. It'll be the due dates of when questions and responses are due, when the notice of intent to award is posted, etc. There will also be the attachments and the website links that were listed within the original request for proposal, and any questions and responses that came through during that process as well. We also have an application component, and this component simply contains the actual application submitted by the contractor for the funding opportunity. But if you're ever interested, just know that at the bottom of the iowagrants.gov landing page, there is that application component which houses that information. So as we're nearing the end of today's webinar, again, this is just really a brief overview of each of the components of iowagrants.gov. But again, in addition to today's webinar, you will be receiving each of those user guides that will provide a tutorial of a snapshot of each of the pages to help you navigate the iowagrants.gov system, as well as that mini kind of 9-minute tutorial on how to actually register an individual within Iowa Grants, as well as how to successfully complete a correspondence within the system as well. So some of the helpful hints that will assist your agency is really, again, to contact the iowagrants.gov help desk if your agency experiences difficulties accessing your grant site. So if you have a contract related or contract specific question, please direct that to your project coordinator via the correspondence component. But if it's really the usability of Iowa Grants or accessing the system, please email the iowagrants.gov help desk and they will assist you moving forward. It's also important to become familiar with the department provided and just please take some time to read through those, to familiarize those. The system that you are familiar with throughout the life of your project period. In addition, anytime that a contractor is submitting reports or any other documents through Iowa Grants, it is advised to download those copies for personal reference within your organization as well. You could simply, print those off and have a hard copy, or you can download those and save them within your agency as well, however you see fit. But the reason that we really encourage people to do that is because the grant sites do become archived after a certain period of time. And once they become archived, your agency may no longer have access to the content within that project period or that contract year. And at the end of a project period, your agency will have to do a final project report. And oftentimes you're going to be needing to have those progress reports or evaluation reports that are shared, that are provided to your agency through Iowa Grants. And it's really important that you have all of that information accessible internally as well, and not just relying solely on iowagrants.gov because of the grant sites becoming archived. So that's a helpful hint. And then if you are not receiving messages from Iowa Grants, because oftentimes you'll receive like a no reply email from Iowa Grants if the department sends you a message or renegotiates a component to you, such as a progress report, you should receive a message from Iowa Grants indicating that that component has been renegotiated to you based on who you've registered within the system. If you are not receiving those messages, we do encourage you to initially contact your agency's IT department, because what we find is oftentimes those issues are kind of behind the scenes within your own agency. Maybe there's a firewall, for example, or something that's a barrier to you receiving those communications from the department. So prior to contacting your project coordinator, the first best practice would be to make sure you're communicating with your internal IT department to see if there is something stopping you from receiving those messages from the department and from Iowa Grants specifically. So with that, it concludes the IDPH Prevention Iowa Grants Overview webinar. At this point in time, I will stop recording and address any questions you may have.